get started. Again, good afternoon. We're so glad that you could join us for our webinar today. We have some really important information to share with all of you. My name is Ashley McLeod-Morin, and I'm an extension faculty with the UF IFAS Center for Public Issues Education in Agriculture and Natural Resources, also known as the PI Center. And today I will be serving as your host and moderator. Also joining me is Carly Lighthizer, the Extension Program Specialist with the PI Center. She'll be assisting with technology support throughout the session, so you may see her in the chat. Thank you for joining today's webinar entitled New World Screwworm is Here, Now What? Featuring Dr. Ted Burgess, Dr. Lori Baker, and Dr. Angie Lindsay, all from the University of Florida. Dr. Ted Burgess is an assistant professor of veterinary entomology. His common goal is to improve control of arthropods that are damaging to non-human vertebrates, especially in the animal production industry. Dr. Burgess conducts his research in both field and laboratory settings, merging tools from physiology, toxicology, biochemistry, behavioral ecology, surveillance, and environmental science. Dr. Lori Baker is a professor of agricultural communication. Throughout her experiences, Baker has developed a research line that is inclusive of science communication preferences, particularly around vector-borne disease, new media technologies, strategic communication, audience analysis, and extension communication. Dr. Baker researches aspects of and strategies for science communication. Dr. Angie Lindsay is an associate professor specializing in disaster preparedness and recovery. Angie currently serves as the UF IFAS point of contact for the Extension Disaster Education Network, or EDEN. Her research and extension work focus on disaster preparedness and recovery within communities, particularly looking at crisis communication efforts before, during, and after disasters. Today's webinar will begin with our panelist presentation, followed by a question and answer section. Throughout the presentation, please leave all comments or questions in the Q&A feature on Zoom. During the Q&A section, I will moderate questions for our presenters. If time does not allow us to answer every question, please direct your comments to the panelist contact information provided at the conclusion of the webinar. Before I begin, I wanted to preference the webinar with a little information about the collaborators that helped put on this event: the PI Center, the Southeastern Center for Excellence for Vector-Borne Diseases, and the Florida Extension Disaster Education Network. The UF IFAS Center for Public Issues Education in Agriculture and Natural Resources, or the PI Center, examines how people think about, form, and act on opinions regarding complex agricultural and natural resource issues. Next, the Southeastern Center of Excellence for Vector-Borne Diseases is a CDC-funded multidisciplinary collaboration that focuses on combining innovative, applied research programs with public health expertise to help prevent and control vector-borne disease threats in the southeastern region of the United States. And finally, Florida Eden is a part of the Extension Disaster Education Network, a collaborative multi-state effort by cooperative extension services across the country to reduce the impact of disasters through research-based education. And with that, I will now hand things over to Dr. Burgess, and we can get started with today's webinar.
All right, thank you for the nice introduction. So I'm going to go over some basic biology and life cycle information on the New World screwworm. As Ashley had pointed out, spent my entire career studying ectoparasites of livestock, especially flies, and so this is a particularly interesting one for me. With that, I'll get started. There is a little bit of a disclaimer that there are some graphic images. This isn't a friendly fly in any sense. If you have a squeamish stomach, be forewarned that there'll be some graphic images on at least one slide. What is the New World screwworm? It's a non-biting fly whose parasitic larvae feed on the live tissues of warm-blooded animals. And this can be cattle, it can be pretty much any agricultural animal as well as wildlife. There's particular concern in wildlife and companion animals as well, like dogs and cats. There are a number of names you might encounter throughout the media or in literature, depending on what you're looking at. So we refer to it as the New World screwworm, but an alternative name would be the primary screwworm. Sometimes it's called the cattle borer worm. Its scientific name is Cochleomya homnivorax. This fly is different than the Old World screwworm, which you will often find the literature mixed up between these two species. The Old World screwworm is a totally different species, Chrysomya beziana, and it is not found in North, Central, or South America. It is primarily in the Old World, so in Africa and the Middle East. And there are no cases of the Old World screwworm here. So it is a fly. It's a shiny green fly, kind of similar to all the common shiny green flies you might find in your backyard or around a dumpster or a garbage can. But it's very unique in that it feeds on the living flesh of warm-blooded animals, whereas all of those other flies primarily feed on rotting or decaying organic matter. And so it being a fly, it has four main life stages. The first, if we're starting at the adult stage, it's that the females lay eggs, and then those eggs hatch and turn into larvae. And those larvae are the dangerous stage. That's the stage that feeds on the living tissues. And then after a certain amount of time, the larvae will vacate the wound that they are in. They will fall to the ground. They will find a dry, dark place and they will crawl into it and then they will pupate and they'll turn into this in this image in the bottom right, these little reddish brown pill-shaped things. And then the adult fly goes through metamorphosis in that puparium and then emerges from it. And so it gets its name screwworm because it feeds head down with its posterior end up, and it actually breathes through its butt through these little things called spiracles. And you see all of these little corkscrews around the image in the top right. And these are these sharp hairs that they have along their body wall that allows them to anchor into the tissues and it allows them to contract and expand to move. And so because they're in that position, they look like a screw, and that's what gives them their name. There is an alternative way that they've been defined too, in that because they kind of screw down into tissue, they act like a screw. So there's kind of two alternative names to the fly, but that's why it's called a screwworm. So the life cycle, this is an important thing for considering how it's managed, how it's spread. So we went through those four life stages. So the adults they're around 3 to 5 times the size of a housefly or a hornfly, and they live for approximately 7 to 10 days in the wild. The eggs are about 10% the size of a dry white rice grain. And a female can lay up to 350 of her eggs at a time in or around a wound. And it takes anywhere from a few hours up to 24 hours for those eggs to hatch. The larvae will immediately climb into that wound and start feeding. The larvae can reach up to 2/3 of an inch in length, and it takes about 5 to 7 days before they go through their larval instars. So these developmental stages within their larval stage before they crawl out of that wound. And then that little puparia, that little reddish brown pill-shaped thing, is about the size of a Tic Tac breath mint. And in pastures or in the environment, oftentimes the larvae will burrow just under the soil so you can't see them, and then they will pupate. And so that makes it really tricky to actually find them, find the puparia in places where the larvae have spread. And then it takes anywhere from about 7 to 10 days for those puparia to develop and turn into an adult. So the entire full life cycle takes about 18 days. Now, there is something very important about this fly in that it is a tropically oriented fly. So it is very low temperature intolerant. So usually in the mid to low 40-degree Fahrenheit temperature range is when the larvae, the adults, and the pupa can't survive for very long. So It's why when you look at historical maps, you don't see the flies spread all over the United States. It's because the seasonality of the United States prevents the fly from being able to establish year long. And it's why it's primarily in the South, because the temperatures stay kind of at that range that above that threshold where the fly can survive year long. There's another really important thing about the biology, and I'll get into this a little bit. This will be important later. It's that the female flies only mate once in their lifetime, and it's to go through that mating process of a single female who hasn't mated yet. A male will mate with her. She stores his sperm for her entire life, and just before she's about to lay her eggs, she will fertilize her own eggs with that store of sperm. And so this is a really key aspect that makes the sterile insect technique so successful in eradicating this fly. And I'll go through that briefly in a little bit. And I like some of these historical images. These are from the first efforts to do the New World screwworm eradication in the United States. They would drop the flies out of planes, which they still do. That's one of the main mechanisms of distributing sterile flies. And they would rear these flies in these mass facilities, think the size of a Walmart. That's how many flies they would have to rear per week in order to create enough to successfully eradicate the fly with this sterile insect technique. So the other parts of this identification, I said earlier that they are a shiny green looking fly, like any of the other kind of shiny green flies you might encounter. They're not going to be evident on animals like horn flies on cattle. They're not going to be just coats of them on the backs of the animals. They're very cryptic. They exist in the environment and they wait and look for animals that have open wounds, and then they will seek those out, find them, land on them, and lay their eggs on them. They don't spend a significant amount of time on the animal. So surveillance is done with traps, and the adult flies are not considered highly dense in an environment that is affected by New World screwworm. So even with trapping, you're not going to trap thousands of New World screwworm flies. You might get a couple dozen in a trap with 10,000 other random shiny green flies. Larval identification is one of the main ways. Unfortunately, one of the key ways of identification is when you find them feeding in an active wound. But the one key hallmark feature of the fly is I mentioned those spiracles before, the things, the little air holes they breathe out of their butt. This image in the bottom left here is a picture of those spiracles, and they are dark when you dissect the larvae open. And other caliphorids or other blowflies do not have that dark tract of their spiracles on the inside of their body. It's clear, or it's the same color as that cream color of their body. So identification can be tricky with larvae. You need some dissecting tools and a microscope to see this stuff. Even further, the adults are also tricky to identify. They're typically identified with these three dark stripes on their backs. And there's a feature about the middle line. It does not come up to the back of the head, but that can be kind of variable. So it's not always the best indicator. It's the New World screwworm. The best way to do it is you need a microscope and you actually look at the front of the head, and there are these very fine little hairs in between their eyes and kind of the midline of their head, and that indicates the species. They look like 93 other species of blowflies that are in the United States. So it can be really tricky to identify. It requires some pretty thorough training on doing this. So this is some of the gory images. So the progression of infestation, the scientific term for this is called myiasis, which is the colonization of tissue by a fly larvae. And the way this progresses is the fly locates a wound, she lays the eggs in or on the wound. The larvae then will feed on that living tissue. They will continue to burrow into the tissue. And then because they go deep into that tissue, it can either result in a couple of things: deep systemic infections, bacterial infections that end up making the animal moribund or killing it. The more gory result is, especially in smaller animals, the larvae will keep feeding deeper and deeper and deeper and can get into the cavities of the body, the skull, the thoracic cavities, and start eating vital organs, and that will kill the animal as well. Um, so how do we beat this thing? Uh, it's with the sterile insect technique, and this is a QR code here. You can take a picture of it with your phone and access the website. This is the history of all the sterile insect technique. I'm a big history buff, so there's all these cool notes and pictures and stuff if you want to understand kind of the history of this technology and why it works so well. And so we went over kind of what the biology of sterile insect technique is. The big thing is numbers. So why can't we just build a bunch of facilities overnight and get this thing taken care of and push it back down through Mexico and Central America and be done with this problem? It's a numbers game. You need hundreds and hundreds of millions of flies per week that can be reared and mass released in order to get the sterile insect technique to work. So right now, the only active facility we have is the one that was in Panama that originally kept the fly contained down in the Darien Gap below Panama. And they can produce about 100 million flies per week, and that conferred the protection in that area. There is a facility right now in Matapa, Mexico, that should be opening within the next several months that can rear between 60 and 100 million flies per week. And then there is a large facility that they are currently retrofitting in Texas, the Moore Air Base, that is projected to be able to rear 300 million flies per week. And so we need to be in that like 4 to 5 to 600 million flies per week to be able to eradicate it kind of from the areas that are affected in the United States right now. Management of New World screwworm is another important consideration. We use insecticides for management. My first advice on this is do not take matters into your own hands. You should be reporting this. If you suspect a case, do not handle it. Try to get it treated and go about your business. That is a surefire way to end with bad results. So there are several types of chemicals. There's wound treatments like sprays and dusts that can kill active larvae. There's prophylaxis like systemic injectables that again work best with young larvae. There are less effective treatments that are available that would target and kill the adult flies when they land on the animal. And then there are things like insect growth regulators, which are chemicals that are popularly used to control things like horn flies in cattle, but they end up in the feces of the animal where those flies develop, and that's not consistent with where the New World screwworm develops in the animal. So those aren't going to be very effective. Um, this table here kind of illustrates, you don't have to read everything on it. It's color coded to give you an idea of general target sites for the insecticides that are available. And all you really need to take from this is that we don't have very many of them. So it really necessitates a careful use of insecticides for managing cases. We shouldn't be using broad scale insecticides for prophylaxis or just, willy-nilly treating animals um, to prevent them from getting New World screwworm cases. And so the USDA APHIS has a list of these products at this QR code. Again, you can take a picture of that and you can see what's been approved. So some key facts and guidelines, and I'm about to wrap up here. So wounds don't have to be big. There's been documented cases that have started from a vacated tick bite. A little tiny speck of a wound is enough to create the conditions for a screwworm case to evolve. It's not common, but it's there to illustrate that it does not require a gigantic gaping wound for this to happen. Infestations create this really bad smelling wound, which attracts other screwworm females to that wound, and they lay more eggs. And so there's this overlapping generation that will happen with them, and that's what causes so much damage. It's not just the result of one female laying eggs; it's multiple females laying eggs and having multiple generations of larvae contributing to that case. The larvae feed on live tissue only. They will not colonize roadkill. They will not colonize your garbage. They are not after that. They're after living tissue. And the larvae die quickly after an animal dies, with the caveat that if the larvae have advanced to a later stage in their larval development, they can leave the wound early and pupate. So just because the animal has been killed or culled for, control reasons does not mean that those larvae are effectively dead. They can crawl out of that wound and continue their life cycle. Very important consideration is do not move animals with suspected cases. Movement of infested animals is the primary mechanism of spread. You should call your appropriate authorities, your state agencies, APHIS, and a veterinarian in order to report this. Again, do not take matters into your own hands and do not move the animals around. That is how you spread the fly. Reporting is highly, highly encouraged here. It will be a main line of defense to stop the spread. As soon as you suspect something, call your local authority, contact APHIS, contact a veterinarian, get people to be aware that you are suspecting a case. That reporting, timely, quick reporting is the best way we're going to control this thing from spreading widely across the United States. That's critically, critically important. And then so for reporting, I have here for the state of Florida, we have our Florida agricultural arm of our government called FDACS. And they have a dedicated web page. This is an example here. You can use this QR code to see what that reporting template looks like. And they have office hours for a hotline for their office hours. They have after hours hotlines to call for suspected cases. They have an email for this. Whatever state you're in, especially if they're at risk states, they should have these already up and established. These are critically important resources for that timely reporting that is so important. Alternatively, if you are unaware of where to go, the USDA APHIS has a really nice website for reporting cases and has a bunch of links on that web page that will give you routes and strategies to find where to appropriately report this in a timely manner. And I will say that everyone is taking this very seriously. Reporting gets handled in an extremely timely manner. So just I can't overemphasize that reporting early if there's a suspected case is the best strategy for containing this and preventing it from spreading any further than it's going to go. With that, I'll take questions, which we'll answer towards the end of this.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bergerson. We've already got several questions in the chat, so please continue to drop those questions in the chat, and at the conclusion of our last presentation, we will get to as many as we can. Thank you again, Dr. Burgess. Next up is Dr. Lori Baker, who will share insights from past science communications research related to vector-borne disease.
Thank you for that. I am going to talk about how to communicate about the New World screwworm, and much of this work is based on vector-borne disease work that we have done, not specific to the New World screwworm. I imagine we'll be digging up more related to that, but done in conjunction with the Southeastern Center for Vector-Borne Disease. So how can we communicate about New World screwworm? Well, what matters most when we're looking at communicating about any contentious issue, but particularly within this landscape of vector-borne disease, looking at the framing of the message, the source of the message, people's perceived risk, and the timing. And so I'm going to go over a few details related to those and what we've learned from previous work within this space. So when I talk about a message frame, what I mean is really the lens through which the message is presented. How can we highlight particular ideas or values or consequences to really shape an audience understanding? So a benefit frame might focus on the positives of early detection and opportunities for moving quickly, and a risk frame may focus on the risk of not reporting or the consequences of not responding to this emerging threat. So let me show you an example within a study. This was actually done with ticks. Much of my examples will be related to ticks, where we looked at both the source, but we looked at the tone related to messaging and whether the speaker or the communicator was confident in their messaging and confident of their actions, rather than a humble frame where they were suggesting or recommending rather than confidently sharing that information. And so, what we found in this particular study was that that confident tone had an advantage over humble tone in influencing message responses and ultimately behaviors. So, communicating with a confident tone can be helpful, but it is also conditional. It depends on that source. It depends on how trusted that source is. And if you're already not a trusted source for that person or that in particular community, then it might be recommended to find a trusted source or to communicate in more of a humble tone and point them to resources that they would find trustworthy within that space. Because there are some challenges with the confident messaging. One of those is certainly that science is evolving and the public has some fears around changes within this space and how science approaches problems. But as we know, scientists need to change their mind as science evolves. And so, making sure that we're confident with the information that we have, but also mentioning that science is evolving. We will keep you updated. Things related to reporting may change, or procedures may change depending on what's happening. So, it's important that we communicate that clearly with confidence along the way. Sources, as I mentioned, really matter. And I think you can think about that in your own life. You're more likely to trust things that come from a source that you find credible. Within this particular study, we did look at scientists versus influencers as well as other groups. And the scientist source messages were generally perceived higher in practicality and confidence in that messaging. But it also depended on how much they already trusted that source ahead of time. So the influencers performed better in cases where they were familiar with that influencer and already trusted them. So right now, getting in front of audiences who already trust you, who already recognize you as the expert in this field will be important. And certainly building those relationships during times of greener pastures, if you will, is important for future communication. Even though there's questions around trust related to science and government and things within this study and within much of our previous work, government agencies, health agencies, and healthcare providers regularly remain high trust sources. And so I think we can be confident with those. Depending on the context of the study, friends and family sometimes outweigh health professionals and government sources. So it's important to think about the communities within people are communicating and finding people that are trusted within each community to communicate about that. One of these things that we've learned recently around cattle producers, particularly, which certainly can be affected by the New World screwworm, we looked at messaging around ticks and looked at prevention-oriented messages, fear-based messages, and neutral messages. The cattle producers were more likely to engage in messages that were prevention-oriented or fear-based than they were those neutral messages. So taking a position may matter to this group rather than remaining neutral. However, similar to the confidence messages, fear can be a little bit tricky. They were actually less likely to trust messages that were heavily fear-based. And so some of the things we learned in the open-ended comments from this really, I think, reflect a lot of what's happening in society right now. A lot of scary things are out there. We can communicate much quicker and faster due to social media channels. And that has affected, in this case, cattle producers in particularly, and how they were willing to trust those fear-based messages. Some of them, actually in open comments said things like, oh, they're just trying to get me scared. I wouldn't be worried about this. I've been dealing with this for a long time and I'm always outside. I shouldn't have to be concerned about these things. And so, really thinking about when the time is to use the heavily fear-based messages, because the sky can't always be falling, or we can't survive as a human species. So, being careful about the fear-based messages, making sure that we're credible and confident in those, and know that fear can encourage people to engage with those messages and listen to those messages, but they might not be as willing to trust those messages if they feel like they're trying to scare them unnecessarily. Thinking about those sources, this is also related to the cattle producers in particular. They were more likely to trust fellow cattle producers and extension agents as sources. And again, those prevention-oriented messages were the ones that they preferred. So those of you that are going to be out there communicating with cattle producers in particular, working through channels like extension agents, using prevention-oriented messages rather than some of those fear appeals may be more effective. There's certainly an element around working with extension agents in this space. We did another study where we looked at extension agents' knowledge, in this case around ticks and tick-borne diseases, and that was fairly low. So I think many of the things that we're trying to do through this work is getting these messages out through all of our communities, whether that's fellow cattle producers, extension agents, healthcare professionals, to make sure that people are confident in delivering these messages. Another aspect of this is we did look at certain types of scientists, and I'm only going to highlight two of these, even though I think we have 7 or 8 that we looked at in particularly. But public health scientists were one of the heavily trusted scientists within this space. And so, as we're looking to people who might be able to communicate this and be the face of the New World Screwworm issue, public health scientists are a source that is an option. Entomologists were also heavily trusted, actually perhaps skewed a little bit more trusted. And this was in general, this wasn't related to a particular issue. So Dr. Burgess is clearly the right person to be delivering this message in many spaces, but he also can't be everywhere. And so public health professionals can take this message and carry it on further and share that knowledge or share resources that have been created by entomologists and other people within this space. Role of scientists overall, there were mixed reviews about whether scientists should be communicating directly with Americans about scientific advancements and related policy, but the majority still agreed or strongly agreed that they should. And so we do believe that there's a role for scientists within this space to communicate things like risk in particular. Over and over within communication theory and communication studies that we've conducted, people won't take action if they don't believe that they are at risk, or that their animals are at risk, or that they have something to lose. So communicating the risk is an important first step. And then using those trusted sources to communicate that risk continually. And you may be able to communicate more confident, assertive tones if you're using those trusted sources to start with. In areas where you're unsure, you may need to lead with some of those more humbling tones, but overall can boost credibility and practicality if you're using clear explanations, actionable guidance on what they should do, and addressing common concerns that they may have will improve that message acceptance. The final component that I wanted to talk about here is timing. And there aren't a lot of positives, I feel like, when we're talking about the New World Screwworm, but I think timing is one of those things that is on our side related to the perceived threat and the national news picking up these issues. It's being communicated across multiple channels. And so this is just a search in Google Trends. We've regularly used Google Trends in a lot of our work to understand people's search behaviors. And essentially, this just shows how many searches there have been for New World Screwworm within the last 24 hours. And so it's 80% higher than it has been. It's trending upwards. So the time is now to get in front of this and communicate with people. They're searching through Google, they're searching through YouTube to try to find more information. While this section's on timing, I did also want to mention that words matter here. And so searches for New World Screwworm in particular have been much higher than at the bottom. You can see if you just search for screwworm, those are trending higher than they have been, but not as high as New World Screwworm. So those are the words that people are currently searching for. When I combine this with pets, there weren't enough searches currently. And so that certainly may be an opportunity where cattle has really been the focus of the national news, but implications for pets have not been searched as heavily, have not been communicated as heavily. So there's certainly opportunities for veterinarians and for other public health officials to start communicating more about how this can affect pets as well. The other thing that can happen in Google Trends, if you want to explore this as you're trying to develop some of your own messaging and how you can talk about these, are related queries. And so these are the related queries for New World Screwworm in particular. So if you're looking for keywords as you're talking about these, this is a great place to think through what people are searching for, what people are interested in, and thinking through how you can communicate this at a level that they'll both understand the risk and be willing to take action as necessary, particularly in situations like checking animals for wounds and paying attention to any signs and bringing in professionals as soon as possible. That is what I have for communicating about New World Screwworm. This QR code does lead you to an APHIS website where there's a lot of photos available. I use some of them in my presentation, but if you're looking for images that you can use in communicating and talking with people about New World Screwworm, those are available and free to use.
Thank you, Dr. Baker, for your presentation. Next up, we have Dr. Angie Lindsay, who will share helpful communication resources and tools from the Extension Disaster Education Network. Angie?
Thank you so much, Ashley. Let me see if I can do this correctly, y'all. Let's see. Try this again. Sorry. Okay, good. And I'm going to kind of wrap things up. So thank you to Ted and thank you to Laurie as well for those great presentations. I'm here to basically provide those fantastic resources that both of them mentioned and making sure that we're sharing this great information out as well. And just a couple of things to keep in mind as well. And thinking about the outreach and some of the things that Ted and Laurie both talked about, there's some great resources out there. And we're talked about in providing up-to-date information. To some of our roles that we work in schools and public organizations, businesses, nonprofit organizations and extensions and others can be those helpful intermediaries in raising awarenesses and providing direction to some of these fantastic resources that are out there and the information that's out there as well. So as you're thinking about getting information out there, think about current relationships and partnerships and where these science-based messages and resources can be shared effectively, and are there current channels where you can make sure that we're sharing these resources out as well. Okay. And moving forward, and Laurie mentioned this, some of our past experiences, not only with foreign animal disease, but other crisis hazards, COVID comes to mind, when providing that science-based resources and messages is critical. What worked, especially within your own organization and your own communities as well, what maybe did not work. How is this different? How maybe do you need to communicate differently? How is this situation different from other situations? and take note of what's being done both proactively and reactively to determine your best course of action in the future. So being able to keep track of some of that information and how you were able to share it. I tell people all the time that your crisis communication plan and those continuing operation plans should be things that you're updating constantly. But in case it's been sitting on a shelf since COVID, it's time to take it off and dust it off a little bit and make sure that some of the things that you thought about proactively and looking at that and getting messages out, it comes into track again, and being able to use some of that information for this particular issue as well. Also, think about that cross-sector collaboration. Many of us work in different areas, in different sectors, and different industries. What are some of those other industries and other sectors, and what are they doing, and how possibly can you work together? But then also look at some of the things that they're doing as well. So make sure that you're thinking about communicating both internally and externally, not only with your internal audiences, but also with your external audiences as well. And looking at that cross-sector collaboration and sharing messages can be very effective in managing an issue and getting information out about an issue as well. Identify those areas and partners in which to share information and potentially work together if you need to. And share your stories. What is your organization doing? But listen for those stories of others and always listen for those needs and gaps and how best to get the messages and also these resources out there as well. And then a lot of times with issues like this that could be ongoing for quite some time, it's being mindful of your physical and mental stress with an ongoing type crisis or an issue such as this as well. And I'm going to leave with some of those great resources, and thanks to Carly for putting them in the chat as well. Obviously, screwworm.gov, and that's come up, and it's a great federal government's primary page for information and updates on New World Screwworm. It's an easy to remember screwworm.gov, and it's a great place. Ted had shared the APHIS website, and I put that there again. Also, think about your state-specific websites, including your Department of Agriculture, Wildlife, Conservation, state veterinarian or veterinarian websites, and then local extension as well. And lastly, just some of the Florida sites, which Ted already provided as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lindsay. We have now completed the presentation portion of today's webinar, and we're going to use the remaining time to answer participant questions. I'm going to also provide here the contact information for our panelists. If we are not able to get to your questions, please feel free to reach out to our panelists, and they'll try to get those answers to you if we're not able to get to them before the end of the webinar. And then finally, we'll share more information about this, but Carly's going to share all these resources that she's also included in the chat. So with that, we're going to start with some questions for Dr. Burgess. There was quite a few questions about the spread of New World Screwworm, and so I'm going to try to combine a few of these for time's sake. Can New World Screwworm spread by an animal touching another animal that has the larva? And then kind of related to that, could a summer sore on horses be an area of concern?
It is not a primary means where if one animal has an infestation and there's another animal that comes into contact with it, the larvae are not going to, vacate a wound and then go crawl around on another animal and try to find a wound on it. It's just not how their biology works. So that's a very, very, very low risk situation there. I would not consider that a main risk factor. Summer sores, anything that's going to be an open wound, is going to be cause for concern. If it's something that exposes the tissue and it stays open, it's at risk. And so wound management is a very important thing here, making sure that wounds are dressed, covered, and carefully monitored. If you're in a high risk zone, areas where there are current cases or nearby cases, it's critically important to maintain very good practices on dressing and monitoring wounds for healing.
Thank you. Are there any pathogens spread by New World Screwworm that we should be looking out for specifically?
No, none that come to mind. They are kind of the pathogen themselves. They're the thing that caused the disease, the disease being called myiasis. So no, they're not, they're not going to be transmitting any kind of viruses or anything like that.
Any idea of how quickly the larva will leave when a host dies?
Yeah, it can be anywhere from it depends. Remember, they're very temperature sensitive, so it depends on how quickly the body cools off. Um, and it can be anywhere from half an hour to several hours. But there were also cases in Florida during the 2016-2017 key deer outbreak where they were putting deer in deep freezer trucks and they were piling them up, and there was enough heat that was being maintained at the center of those, carcass piles that the larvae stayed alive in those deep freezer trucks for a long time. So, um, it's really dependent on kind of how quickly the body cools off.
Thank you, Dr. Burgess. We have a few questions now for Dr. Baker. How is preference for a message measured in the context that you shared about? Does it mean that the message was more likely to be trusted, acted upon, or engaged with?
Um, so it depends on different studies, but all of them we looked at that final behavior. So were they willing to take prevention behaviors? And that's how we measured effectiveness. In the case of the cattle producer study, we measured it both ways. Were they willing to engage with the content? So like, share, comment. And were they willing to then take those preventative actions or move forward with the behaviors that were proposed?
And another question for you, Dr. Baker. Did the survey that you discussed evaluate the level of participants' trust in veterinarians as an information source? Or maybe you can talk about trust among veterinarians, especially
Mhm.
since veterinarians are one of the common messengers during this outbreak.
Yes, absolutely. We didn't ask specifically about veterinarians. We asked about agricultural scientists, and they remained high as trusted sources within that space. I'm trying to remember how much was veterinary specific, because those will be certainly important sources here. In general, when we've asked in previous surveys about communication between those audience groups, like veterinarians and physicians, we haven't found a lot of communication between those two groups. So I think those are some opportunities to certainly communicate within this space. I think in the space of veterinarians in particular, when you're talking about things related to animals, it makes sense that they would be the first call, the first trusted source. Again, outside of those friends and family, which are the communities that sometimes are providing some iffy advice or recommendations online that we really want to get ahead of. But yeah, I'm sorry we didn't specifically drill down to veterinarians, but they were encompassed in the agricultural scientists overall.
Thank you. And then I believe this is another question for Dr. Burgess. How long have eradication efforts taken before? Is this something that will take years to have screwworm eradicated again?
That's a very good question. So when they ramped up all of the facilities, kind of the very brief history of it was initiated in Florida in the 60s. And it was successfully eradicated in the state of Florida with the help of a very, very cold winter that we had in Florida in the matter of about a year. And then that proof of concept inspired the federal government to build the national eradication program. And it took, a matter of 3 to 5 years to get it fully eradicated. And then there was a plan after that to begin pushing it down through Mexico, Central America, and then getting it kind of strategically positioned on the southern part of the Darien Gap, which is a little narrow landmass south of Panama. And that's another kind of important biological feature of the fly is that they won't fly over water for very long distances. So that little narrow land bridge provided a really strategic way to kind of isolate the fly south of Panama. But it just took a matter of a few years when they had enough flies. So, this isn't a 20, 30-year process that's going to take. It's a really effective strategy You know, to predict how long it's going to take now, I'm not sure. That's a hard prediction to make, but historically it didn't take a super long period of time.
And then a follow-up on that, what other or are there any other self-limiting control techniques being developed or tested for New World Screwworm?
Yeah, so there's a technology right now called NovoFly that they're working on, which is the problem with sterile insect technique is you need the sterile males, right? The male's sperm is sterilized and you release both males and females into the environment. It's impossible to sort all of them out. Um, the female's eggs are irradiated, but the male's sperm is also irradiated. So when he fertilizes a wild female, she can't fertilize her eggs. Um, the problem with that for production purposes is they have a 50-50 sex ratio when you rear them. So if you have 10 pupa, five of them are going to be females, five of them are going to be males. So the NovoFly technology is a technology where they can select for matings and generations of flies will be 100% males. So it effectively doubles the capacity for flies to be reared as males. So it doubles that capacity to have sterile males.
And then another question for you, Dr. Burgess. You're popular in the Q&A. Are infested animals typically quite mobile still, or are they lethargic or sedentary?
They are so New World screwworm infestation is not a comfortable thing. It's the same thing I answer when I get questions about, in the rare cases that humans get it, what happens? And the answer is you'll know you have it very early. It's very, very painful because they're feeding on living tissue. It's the same thing for the animals. They will show signs of stress. They'll be intermittent feeding. They'll slow down on feeding. They'll isolate themselves from a herd. They won't move around. They'll just be in really strong signs of stress when they have this. The other thing is that it smells absolutely atrocious when you have this. So you know it's there from a pretty far distance.
Historically, what have been pockets or environments that can work as sources for New World screwworm and might pose issues in area-wide control?
Um, so a big reservoir that's hard to control are wildlife. So, a lot of people have seen in the news about the limitation of movement of animals from afflicted counties in Texas right now. The state of Florida has some restrictions on that movement. I want to say, those restrictions are very, very important because the spread of the fly is primarily driven by movement of infested animals. This isn't, an overly risky thing that's happening. This is a really centrally important strategy to mitigate the spread is by limiting the import and export of animals out of these zones. But with that being said, reservoirs of it include wildlife. So we can count every head of cattle. We know where everyone's going. What's happening with the raccoons and possums and squirrels and things that are in the environment? Those are much harder to keep track of. And that really provides kind of a difficult logistical issue with managing spread.
And then one more question for you, Dr. Burgess, and then we'll kind of do a round robin question. For the current technology for fly rearing, when stats say 100 million flies raised per week, is that counting female and male flies, or is that just male flies?
That's the total amount reared. So that's the total amount that they would have to release, and they're releasing males and females because it's logistically impossible to sort 50 males out of 50 million males out of 50 million females. I've been doing this my entire career. I could probably sort 5,000 flies in a day. So imagine how long that would take to do that every week. It's really a 50-50 split.
Thank you. And then here's a question for all of the panelists. And if you want to start, Dr. Burgess, you can, and then maybe we can hear from the other panelists as well. What's one thing you wish more people understood about New World screwworm that isn't getting enough attention right now? I think that this was something brought up in Dr. Baker's presentation that there is a lot of information being shared right now. But what's something that you really wish that people understood that isn't getting enough attention?
Um, there's a lot about the sterile insect technique. There's a lot about insecticide wound management. There's a lot about the restriction of animals. I tried to emphasize it in my talk, and I'll use this opportunity to emphasize it again. Reporting suspected cases is one of the most important frontline defenses we have. Sterile insect technique will eradicate it again eventually. Chemicals are used to manage cases. Um, restricting imports is going to limit spread. Equally important in all of those efforts is reporting quickly and accurately and not being afraid to do so. This is not going to be a situation where the government's going to do something bad to you or anything like that. They are encouraging rapid, clear reporting, even if there's a little bit of a suspicion. You would rather be careful than have it be the real thing and you didn't report it, and that's a source of spread now. That's critically, critically important.
That's a great nugget of information, Dr. Burgess. Dr. Baker, Dr. Lindsay, is there anything that you wish that people understood more from the social science or extension side of things?
I feel like it's almost an opposite. Not that there's a lack of so much information, but that there are a lot of myths right now that are out there and being spread pretty quickly. And so I feel like there's an opportunity for some of our experts to really get ahead of this, do a Mythbusters scenario, to talk about what is and isn't true, to highlight the facts and sources that we could be sharing for better information. I think we've even seen it on late night talk shows as jokes and things that I think are kind of perpetuating a different perception of what's happening than the reality.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Dr. Lindsay, anything to add?
I sure. I just want to say I've seen a lot of collaboration among different organizations and different levels of the USDA level, and but also within our state level as well, and a lot of great collaboration. And so, looking at those resources that we shared is a collaboration, and I think that's important to remember that folks are working together behind the scenes to make sure we get the most accurate information out there for people.
That's great. Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. So we're going to go ahead and share some wrap up information with you. But again, I think that we got to almost all the questions in the chat. If there were any other comments or questions that you wanted to get more input from our panelists on, again, their contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to shoot them an email and they will get back to you in a timely manner. Again, I want to thank you all for attending today's webinar. We hope to host you again for a future webinar. I think that Carly is going to share some information about future webinars from the Pi Center or our partner programs, either in the chat or in a follow-up email. Please consider also completing the post-webinar evaluation so that we can continue to offer timely and relevant learning opportunities to you based on the feedback that you can share with us. And with that, we hope that you have a great rest of your day and that you interact with these panelists again in the future. Thank you so much.